Well, welcome, and to our event tonight. This is the final global briefing series of the academic year, the academic semester. My name is Randy Kluver. I am the Dean and Associate Provost of the School of Global Studies and Partnerships at Oklahoma State University, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's event. The purpose of the Global Briefing Series is for us to bring to our campus and our community informed discussion of important global issues. And so as a part of that, we bring voices and experts from both the OSU community and around the nation to our campus and to our community. Tonight, I would like to thank the College of Arts and Sciences for co-sponsoring with us, and to O State TV for hosting our event, and to Shane Steinkraus for all the invaluable technical assistance he's given us. Well, we've just come to the end of an exhausting election cycle, and it seems very evident that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. He faces a number of challenges in rebuilding how the United States is perceived overseas and how we interact with our allies and with our rivals. When President Trump came to power, he promised to be a disruptive president and to bring a number of new initiatives and to really shake up how we do business with our partners and rivals around the world. He immediately pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He led the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, and he pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, which had been a signature accomplishment of the Obama administration. Now, of course, the trade war with China seems to be stuck in a stalemate, and the United States, along with every other nation, seems to be stuck in a global pandemic. Immigration policy has certainly been at the forefront of discussion about the election. And finally, it would be remiss to not mention the notable breakthrough in the Middle East, where a number of Arab nations have started to establish ties with the nation of Israel. And so Biden, when he comes in, President-elect Biden promises to reverse a number of the policies and the procedures and the tone of President Trump's actions and his activities. But he's constrained. He's constrained by U.S. public opinion to some extent. He's constrained by a Congress, which is certainly at this point divided, as well as the actions of other geopolitical actors. And so our purpose tonight is to really explore these and to bring a number of experts from the OSU campus together to discuss what this means for the Biden presidency and how the U.S. might engage with the world. I'm going to introduce each of our speakers in the order in which they will speak. First is Dr. Jamie Fullerton, Professor of Strategic Communication and the Director of the Master's Program in Global Policy at Oklahoma State University. Dr. Fullerton is an expert in U.S. Public diplomacy and will be looking at the U.S. image around the world and what it would take to rebuild that. Next will be Dean Glenn Kreutz, Professor of Political Science and Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Oklahoma State. Dean Kreutz is an expert in policymaking within the U.S. government, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, and so he'll be exploring some of those issues. And finally, Dr. Stephen Nemeth, Associate Professor of Political Science, will be looking at the geopolitical and security challenges facing the administration. Our procedure tonight is each of the panelists will make a short presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions and interaction to go more in depth on any of the issues that arise. We invite the audience to contribute questions, and you'll see a number that will show up on your screen. If you text your questions to those messages, we'll pull from those to feed those to the speakers. Next, let me turn it over to Dr. Jamie Fullerton.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that I'm here, and this is a really neat opportunity. Sorry, I already messed it up, but I was asked to talk about public diplomacy and to talk about the image of the United States. My research is generally focused on our country's international reputation, and one of the sources that I really like to use is the Pew Global Attitudes Research. The Pew Research Center started this about right after 9/11, about 20 years ago, and they've been asking a random sample of international folks from many countries how they feel about the United States, whether they're favorable or unfavorable. The latest round of surveys happened in the summer of 2020. So if you'll show that first slide, Shane. So you can see, if you go back 20 years, that our favorability among some of our closest allies, Japan, Canada, Australia, and others, has fallen pretty low. Will you put up the next slide, please, Shane? This looks at a trend over 20 years, and it asks about your confidence in the U.S. president. Now, remember, these are folks, just regular citizens living in other countries. This particularly looks at Europeans. And you can see that we hit a real low point at the end of the Bush administration, probably because of the Iraq war. And then when Obama was elected in 2008, you see it went up and then came back down under the Trump administration. So let's look at one more slide, Shane, please. This sort of combines the two slides. So while the confidence in Trump, for example, is low, the favorability still remains relatively high. So one of the things we talk about in this field is the fact that the government and the people are sometimes viewed separately. So people, international audiences can have a favorable view of Americans while they don't necessarily like our government. Okay, I'm done with the slides, I think. So we're going to be watching over the next several months. The Pew folks will probably go out in the spring and collect some more data. We'll see if those favorability ratings increase. I expect that they might. I was asked to specifically address public diplomacy efforts and effects. And so I want to zero in on the State Department and what's going on there under it's the Foreign Service officer's job to improve these favorability ratings. I mean, that's what they do as diplomats, is they interact with the international media and with communities overseas to improve attitudes and win hearts and minds for the United States and for U.S. policy. So from what I hear, it's been really hard to be a Foreign Service officer during the Trump administration. I've heard stories about unexpected tweets that come in right before a diplomat's going into a meeting to work on a negotiation that's been going on for months that, totally undermines their efforts. For this and for other reasons, many of the Foreign Service officers have left their posts, and it really is a shame that we've lost many of these senior diplomats. There is a bright side to this, though, because that means there's lots of job openings. Some of them will return in the Biden administrations, but others won't. And, in our program in Global Studies, we have a track in public diplomacy. So I'm excited that we could train some students that could step right into a career in Foreign Service. My sources also tell me that Susan Rice will likely be the next Secretary of State. She's a former ambassador to the UN and National Security Advisor under President Obama. The Foreign Service seems pretty happy with this choice. I may be wrong about that, but that she seems to be the front runner at the moment. The final piece that I wanted to address is propaganda. Public diplomacy and propaganda often go hand in hand, and there was a time when diplomats called themselves propagandists at times. So right now, the problem with propaganda is that our adversaries like Russia and our competitors like China are using the unconventional election that we've just been through. All these days of counting votes and the president questioning the legitimacy of the election is really being used as a propaganda tool in these countries to tell these people in authoritarian regimes that free democracy doesn't work. So it's not a good look for the United States. Right now, we're supposed to be a model of democracy, and at the current time, they're using our situation against us. So I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences.
All right. Well, thanks. Thank you so much for having me. My family tells me I look like a gamer when I wear my headphones, but I find the sound works a lot better this way. So I appreciate you bearing with me on that. Great to be with you. So I'm a student of American politics and public policy, and one of the policy areas that I study is foreign policy. And so one important aspect of international relations and foreign policy is the fact that it is it's to a degree voluntary. There are, yes, associations around the world to which nations are a member, and they have to do certain things. But for the most part, running the world together is voluntary, and therefore, in many ways, it's coalitional. And that's the coalitional dynamic is even more important when you look within the U.S. system at how foreign policies are decided on within the U.S. And so I've studied across a variety of projects how the foreign policy agenda for the U.S. is set, how issues rise and fall on that agenda, how decisions are made on international commitments, and that includes whether to do an international agreement from the U.S. side as a treaty or an executive agreement. Increasingly, those are done as executive agreements. The three, what I want to do is talk a bit about the coalitional aspect within the U.S. system and what a Biden administration brings to that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the three most important actors in American foreign policy making. Talk about the president, the agencies, and then I'm going to talk about the Congress. Okay, and first on the president end of things. While there are some things that presidents can do unilaterally in foreign policy to stop things or to enter certain executive agreements that don't change federal law, they're pretty reliant on the other actors. They're reliant on the Congress for funding programs, for implementing legislation, on executive agreements that might change federal law, for funding. They're quite reliant on the agencies. And I think some of that reliance by the president on both the agencies and the Congress frustrated President Trump. He really wanted to be more in charge of foreign policy. And while foreign policy is an area where a president has more tools at his, hopefully one day her disposal to carry out than domestic policy, it's still the case that in foreign policy, the president doesn't lead alone. While the president's arguably the single most important actor in American foreign policy, the president can't do it all on his or her own. The constitutional system rules on budgeting, rules on hiring and firing of career bureaucrats, bring in these other actors into the equation. And so as we think about the coalitional aspect, first, again, I'm going to do president, bureaucracies, Congress. First on the president end of things and the coalitional dynamic, I think we will see a President Biden much more coalitional in his focus. He's a proven coalition builder. He's a proven team player with other state leaders around the world. And so I think you'll see us, in addition to rejoining several international efforts that have been mentioned here in the media coverage, I think you'll see him coordinating more with other leaders. And how can we run things better? How can we manage the world together better? Not to say that he'll be too much of an idealist. He'll certainly be a realist in making sure that America's preferences and America's efforts, its desires are in the mix. He'll be more of a player on the stage. And so, not that he'll be a straight liberal internationalist. He might also have some things that he does, like what President Obama did, that are neoconservative. But for the most part, I think you're going to see a more coalitional dynamic from the Biden White House. You're also going to see the president reach down and work more with the career staff, some of the folks that Dr. Fullerton just mentioned that are being considered for leading the cabinet agencies, and some of the career folks. He'll bring them into the fold as it makes sense to discuss certain issues. And there'll be a certain approach with the president that, he won't have his hands in everything. He won't be too top down, but he will rely on those folks quite a bit. And then I think you'll see the president reaching out to Congress quite a bit more, both to the Senate and the House. Yes, the president needs the Senate if he's going to have treaties codified with that supermajority required. But more often than not, these days, you see executive agreements done, and executive agreements often have to face a majority vote in the House and the Senate for funding, for modifications of U.S. law, and the like. And given the leadership positions that Joe Biden has held in the Senate previously, he knows all this. He knows what he has to do to reach across the other branch, to Capitol Hill, to get these things done. Moving to the agencies have to be coalitional by design. They're reliant on the political appointees at the top of their organizations. They're reliant on the president and the Congress for funding, and they're reliant on one another. If you look at the foreign policy bureaucratic structure in the U.S. government, there are multiple agencies involved in it, and so they really have to work across agencies in many cases to carry out American foreign policy. And I think in a word, especially the last 2 years of the Trump administration, I think the first 2 years went a bit better than these last 2 years. These last 2 years, I think there's been a fair amount of fear among career employees in the foreign policy agencies. What can I do? What can't I do? I think having a different president there, having President-elect Biden take office, I think will free up some of those folks to engage in the duties and the activities we expect them to. So moving last to the Congress. So Congress is interesting. We may think, in our bicameral and also in our separation of powers look at American government, that Congress would be an equal partner in foreign policy. And while it certainly has several mentions in the Constitution related to foreign policy, Congress is largely delegated to the president in foreign policy. Okay, and you may wonder why is that the case? Well, look at the incentives and the decision calculus that members of Congress, the legislators themselves, have to deal with. So they're thinking about things like re-election. They're thinking about, how do I get a bill through in an area that's going to be advantageous to the constituents back home? And it's not always the case that the topics of foreign policy are compelling to constituents, or that legislators, strategic actors, in trying to curry favor with their constituents, can use foreign policy to achieve that. Okay, so it's not a given that all the legislators on Capitol Hill will clamor to be active on foreign policy issues. So part of the inherent delegation of the executive branch flows from that. Legislators are wired to tackle other issues that might have a more proximate impact on constituents, and allow them to sort of shake that causal chain between the legislator and the constituents in a beneficial way to them. I would like to say a thing about the close majorities in the Congress. So the House, the Democrats are losing some seats there. The Senate, if I had to predict it, will go 51-49 to the Republicans. I think the Georgia seats will split. One will be Democratic, one will be Republican. Then I'll make it 51-49. So Vice President Harris could make a tie, but not break a tie. And so they've got it'll be a close majority situation in the Senate. The House, while still Democratic, it's a smaller majority the Democrats will have. All of that will invite in, I hope, an incentive for the two parties to come together and think about some policy issues. And with a more coalition-oriented president, perhaps some things can happen there. The alternative is nothing happens in Congress, and foreign policy continues to be driven by the White House and by the agencies. So that's a bit about some of the coalitional dynamics from the American politics side, and I'd be happy to take up any questions folks have as we move along with the program.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. It's really timely for a number of reasons. One is I'm currently teaching our American foreign policy class. And so a lot of the things that we've been talking about already have some resonance to what I've been discussing with my students. So at least before I get too far into talking about some of the security issues that face the incoming administration, I kind of want to provide some context. I think, one, it's very interesting for us to be talking about foreign policy in an election that I'm not sure that a lot of people would think was a foreign policy election. I mean, I think primarily the issues regarding the election were COVID, the economy, and then the temperament of Donald Trump. So foreign policy was given short shrift throughout. There was a Wall Street Journal editorial which lamented that basically 15 minutes were given to a dangerous world in the second, or it was supposed to be the third presidential debate. So 15 minutes worth in a world which seems increasingly dangerous and a world that seems increasingly or different than it did 4 years ago with Donald Trump's election. The other thing that I'd like to talk about in terms of context is really that the dichotomy between domestic and foreign policy is kind of a false one. Our treatment, our behavior, or our treatment of our own citizens, or our treatment of immigrants, or the imposition of travel bans, or the way that the government responded to social justice protests are all important with how we deal with other countries. It becomes very apparent that the United States might have some problems, and this decreases our moral leadership. And it becomes very difficult to tell countries to create a freer press, to have free and fair elections, if we have questions about that within our own country. And then the other thing I want to bring up too, and Dean Kreutz kind of talked about this, is that Biden is a skilled hand when it comes to foreign policy issues. So prior to becoming the vice president, he had served as a senator from Delaware from 1972 until 2009. And over those 37 years, he served as the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And as part of that, he traveled to conflict zones. And then as part of his role as the vice president, entertained many VIPs and many people who are still in positions of power around the world. So he's probably, I would venture, the most qualified foreign policy president we've had since George H.W. Bush. So and then lastly, what I want to say too is that I'd like to think about Biden as a pragmatist. I don't think that a lot of his foreign policies are going to strike anybody as truly progressive or any sort of idealistic pie in the sky foreign policies. I think that as a senator, he was guilty of some missteps when it came to foreign policy. But I think that a lot of the foreign policy that we are going to see going forward with President Biden is going to be a bit of a recycled foreign policy from the Obama administration. Already, you see with some of these transition teams, a lot of familiar names. Dr. Fullerton mentioned Susan Rice, probably going to be the next Secretary of State. So we're going to see a lot of things that look familiar. So that being said, what do I view as kind of the critical security issues moving forward for Biden? Well, one, I do want to say kind of as a little bit of a preamble here, I am an international security scholar. And as I tell my students, I study when things blow up. But there are many different aspects to security that we need to consider. So one is the issue of human security. And so human security deals with human rights. It deals with the ability of people to pursue their wishes and having that not be restricted. The other part is economic security. And so we had mentioned a little bit about the Trans-Pacific Partnership at the outset. And then lastly is international security. So my points here are going to be perhaps a little scattershot, but I just want to provide that little bit of a preamble. So at least first, I think the most critical security issue facing the United States is containing COVID. And it's a security issue in the sense that it impacts our economic security. It impacts our ability to, when we have less people working, there's less tax dollars going into the hopper, and that's going to be problematic in terms of funding programs going forth. That's going to have a detrimental impact on the national debt. And the national debt going forward is going to be something that is going to lead to big questions about the things that we can fund and the things that we cannot fund. So my other kind of concerns here going forward is thinking about how the United States can reassert its commitments to the bedrock principles that have characterized American foreign policy since World War II and since the end of the Cold War. One is reestablishing our commitment to democracy. So during the 4 years of the Trump administration and preceding that to some degree, there was a wave of right-wing populism throughout Europe and throughout other countries in the world. And so this is called the viability of democracy into question. There are a number of research articles which have used Pew surveys and other surveys that ask populations of these countries their thoughts about democracy. And without exception, democracy and support for democracy is at its lowest ebb in recent history. So what Biden is going to have to do is kind of a heavy lift to reassert that democracy is kind of the preeminent and the best form of government that we have to date. And so some of his foreign policy goals have talked about creating a meeting of democracies in order to reestablish faith in democracies, in order to combat some of those outside actors which have been drawing or have been creating doubts about the democratic system. The other aspect, the other kind of security concern that Biden has to deal with is recommitting the US to working within institutions. So the way I characterize Biden, he is a multilateralist, much like his Democratic predecessors. And so he's going to have to reassert American leadership and American goodwill. And this is going to be rather hard after 4 years of pretty consistent criticism of institutions. And we are well aware of the Trump administration withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords. We are well aware of the Trump administration withdrawing from the World Health Organization. So the United States is going to have to reaffirm the commitments to those organizations and rejoin those organizations, and that's one of the main goals that Biden has for his first 100 days in office. Also, the U.S. has to reaffirm its commitment to the UN. It has to reaffirm its commitment to NATO, and it has to reaffirm its commitment to the European Union. And these are all going to be heavy lifts. And I think one of the things that I'm concerned with going forward is how do we reassure leaders of other countries that our commitments now, commitments made by President Biden, are going to be honored in a subsequent administration. It's not something that I think a lot of people had thought about, but Trump represented such a complete break with the way that business had been done in the past. And so I'm concerned that we're going to lose some credibility in the sense that no one is going to think that our agreements are going to last more than 4 years because someone will come in and create or just kind of scrap those existing agreements. Something that was mentioned in the outset, how is the JCPOA, so the Iran nuclear agreement, how is that going to work? So given that the United States had a very public breakup with that particular agreement, how is the Iranian government going to respond to overtures to have the United States rejoin that particular agreement, and the United States taking part in the New START agreement? And the START agreement is the strategic arms reduction talks with Russia. And I just kind of just some general things here in terms of just our bilateral agreements. So working just with other countries one-on-one. So our relationships with allies in Europe, in terms of thinking about Germany, in terms of thinking about Great Britain and the Brexit agreement, our commitment to resolve our commitment to defend Korea, and then providing the nuclear umbrella to our allies. So these are all going to be things that we're going to have to consider over time. I'll leave my comments at that, and thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Some great opening thoughts. We've gotten a large number of questions already, and rather than trying to feed them all through to you, I'm going to try to group them and feed them to you as in your area of expertise. Our first question is really directed towards Dr. Fullerton. The recent election has led some to question the strength of U.S. democracy, the process of the election, the delayed results, the disputed results. How do you think the election and its aftermath will impact the image of the U.S. with international audiences?
Yeah, well, I talked about that a little bit, and then Dr. Nemeth picked up on that. it's going to be, it's going to be an issue. Our allies, our democratic partners, can kind of understand what's happening. The ones that I'm more worried about is how it's going to impact the credibility of democracy overall, as Dr. Nemeth mentioned. It's in those authoritarian states, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and even China, where they're pointing to what's going on here and saying, see, it doesn't really work all that well, does it? And also, we can't forget the social unrest that we've experienced. Also, the fact that we haven't done that well with COVID. I mean, we're getting beat up pretty well. Now, there may be some of you out there saying, who cares? Who cares what other countries think about us? And I think the previous administration sort of had that attitude. They didn't really care what other people thought. The problem is, when people hate us, things happen like terrorism. Things happen for national security. We run into problems with trade. It's a good idea to be popular in the world. So I think we need to work on it.
Terrific. The next question is for Dean Kreutz. Is our current system of checks and balances between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches sufficient to protect our country when it comes to foreign policy? So, for example, if the president becomes incompetent for some reason, or for either medical or political reasons, does the current system work?
I think it does. Some of the decisions and moves that President Trump made certainly pushed the envelope in this regard. There were a couple key aspects related to travel bans and whatnot that he attempted to do through executive orders or executive agreements, and the courts checked him there, and I was thankful for that. So it's not just Congress checking the president in foreign policy; it's also so the courts entering in when to interpret whether a particular executive order, executive agreement is legal, is constitutional. And so there's been some fear in this election cycle about President Trump pushing the envelope so much, and what if he does this, what if he does that, and while it has been stressful at times, I remain optimistic about the separation of powers. Again, Congress, if it wanted to, really could step up and be more of an actor. They've chosen that the language of the Constitution and the norms of the Constitution would allow Congress to be more active. They've chosen, for the most part, to delegate to the executive branch authority in foreign policy. They could bring that back, and so that lever is there if they want to use it. So I think the balance, the checks and balances, is working. The design of it's fine. It certainly was tested in this administration, but I'm optimistic about it working into the future.
Thanks for that. The next question is for Professor Nemeth. Currently, the world system, largely built by U.S. efforts, such as the World Trade Organization, the UN, so on and so forth, is rejected by many in the U.S., in some ways undermined by President Trump. With Americans looking increasingly inward, will this system survive, or do we need to start over?
Well, I mean, I don't think that there are, I don't think these institutions are perfect, but I do think that, I like to think about it like this. Both the World Trade Organization and the UN and a lot of these other international institutions are like a referee. And a good referee is one that you don't notice. And so you're going to view a referee in an unfavorable light when they do things that you don't like. But most of the time, these institutions work in the favor of the U.S. If we think about the World Trade Organization, there is a dispute resolution process that the United States has used multiple times when it comes to issues about intellectual property. And in the overwhelming number of cases, the World Trade Organization has ruled in the favor of the United States. And I think the other part about thinking about these institutions is that it's very hard to prove a negative. So what I tell my students is that it's very easy to see the negative aspects of a globalized trade system. It's very easy to view a factory that closes down, but the benefits that we receive, cheaper products, a cheaper iPhone, these are things that are kind of less obvious, right? Because we don't know how much an iPhone would cost without the set of trade links that we have established. We don't know how much a pair of jeans would cost if we didn't have a global free trade system. So I think it partially has to do with, one, I think that there are some changes that would have to be made to these institutions, but I think the other part is just being like that referee. A good referee is not noticed. And so we like to kind of cherry pick those times when the referee calls against us, and those are very rare.
Thank you so much for that. This is a question really for all of the panelists. What will likely be the policy of a Biden administration in the Middle East, and how will that differ from the Trump administration? How will President-elect Biden be viewed by allies such as Israel and Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth? And will this change of this transition cause us to lose critical momentum to what have been some notable successes in the region?
Well, one of you political scientists should take that one, but we certainly can't ignore the fact that the Trump administration made some progress in the Middle East, which looked for decades, intractable.
So I guess if I could jump in, I know that there is probably some skittishness for Benjamin Netanyahu now that Biden is the apparent winner of the election. And a part of me also just thinks that some of the commitments or some of the decisions made by the Trump administration are fait accompli. I'm not necessarily sure that the U.S. Embassy is going to move from Jerusalem. I think that might be a possibility, but I think that die has already been cast. I think President Biden is going to be warmly received by the Arab world. And so I think that might lead to some tensions with Israel. And I think the other part too is that, and this might be a little bit of this is my particular judgment, some of those successes touted by the Trump administration with getting recognition for Israel from some Arab states, I think are a little overblown, because these countries are not the direct neighbors of Israel. These are not the classic enemies that we would think of Israel. These are countries that are not really proximate at all to Israel. So there has been some positive momentum, but I think that's been overstated.
Thank you.
Yeah. Dean Kreutz, did you have a comment on that?
Unmute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, related to the Middle East, don't have much to add in general to what Dr. Fuller and Dr. Nemeth said, but with specific regard to the Iran nuclear deal, it's very likely that that's back on the table, and that together with some of the progress recently with the Trump administration could be a positive in my view.
Good. Let's turn for a second to trade. And I know none of us are trade specialists, but much of what happens in the world is driven by trade. And for a number of years, we've assumed that geopolitics is driven by trade. And global trade has been slowed down not just by the tariff war with China, for example, but by a rising suspicion of globalization and the pandemic. What are the prospects for global trade picking back up? Will we see a different set of global trade relationships that emerge out of the future?
Go ahead, guys.
Well, I'm also not a trade scholar as well, but I think the commitment that previous Democratic administrations had with creating new trade agreements, especially was mentioned first in terms of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I could see things like that back on the table. And I think that would have a beneficial impact on trade flows going forward. I guess the one thing I will say is that that's provided progress on COVID.
Yeah, and I if I could jump in here, I think several of the multilateral trade pacts we were involved in previously that Trump has turned a cold shoulder to the extent the Biden administration attempts to re-engage in those, that would be a positive and would signal to other actors that we're ready to do more of those agreements. I think it will rely to an extent in terms of whether it would be new treaties, multilateral treaties, or executive agreements. It would depend on the relationships that President Biden sets up over in the Senate and the House. If he's able to move towards a supermajority on foreign policy, he could maybe begin to think about some treaties, moving those through the Senate. But it's been more difficult as the years have gone on to get that 2/3 of those present majority needed to codify a treaty. And so increasingly presidents rely on executive agreements. And other actors around the world much prefer the treaties. Randy Kluver, Dr. Kluver was alluding to that earlier. There's, and Dr. Nemeth as well, there's sort of an instability to an executive agreement that other actors worry about. They'd rather it be a treaty, which has more permanence. Whereas executive agreements, like the Iran nuclear deal, Obama enters, Trump pulls us out, the next president, let's see who wins, will they put us back in, right? Where a treaty, if we had established that with regard to Iran, Trump wouldn't have been able to remove us from that.
That's a tremendously important point of thinking about the actual mechanisms of foreign policy, whether it's executive action or something larger. And it's often those details often get lost in the mess. So I want to turn to Dr. Fullerton. I've got a question that's come in for you. Recently, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which oversees Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and so on and so forth, has come under some as let's call it, been reformed under the Trump administration. And many are arguing that it undermines American soft power because it undercuts our promise of honest and open media. What can President-elect Biden's administration do to restore the AGM and American soft power abroad?
Well, I'm a big fan of Voice of America. I am, most Americans don't know much about it, but it's been around since after World War II, and many people credit Voice of America. It's fair and independent broadcasting across the Soviet Union to ending the Cold War in many ways. So, and Voice of America was typically a radio broadcast outlet. It's expanded under the U.S. Agency for Global Media. It includes providing internet and other independent media sources for folks around the world, some of whom don't have access. I mean, we don't realize that if you're living in Iran, you may not have access to anything except what the Iranian government tells you. And so being able to get online and find out the truth is really important. And the U.S. Agency for Global Media was assuring that could happen. For some reason, our current president is enamored with media, and he felt like Voice of America, because it is funded through the U.S. government, should be a propaganda tool, a news agency to promote America and promote the administration and him in many ways. And so he just gutted that agency. He fired a lot of really devoted journalists and put a person in, Michael Pack, who was a right-wing broadcaster, and it's just really suffered. It's my hope that President Biden will restore the agency and it'll come back to its former glory, and we will start repairing some of the damage that we've done.
For that, this is a question for Dr. Nemeth, really related to the U.S. ties with China. Recently, the Coast Guard of the People's Republic was authorized to fire on foreign vessels in what are perceived as China's territorial waters. Considering this dispute in the South China Sea, the Nine Dash Line, and so on, how is this going to impact China's relationships with other powers, and how does the U.S. mediate that, if we do?
Sure. I mean, I think this presents a real opportunity for the United States to leverage or to reestablish relationships with countries in that region that might have withered during the Trump administration. So I know that a lot of this has to do with China reasserting dominance over or building islands in the South China Sea. And I think one of the things that the U.S. could do is to have a much a larger and more beefed up presence. This kind of also brings to mind the pivot to China during the Obama administration. So I think that the harsh actions of the Chinese government basically present a real opportunity for the United States to rebuild some of those frayed tensions in that area.
Thank you. I've got a question for Dean Kreutz at this point. How do you think the Biden administration will manage the tension between domestic and international distribution of an eventual vaccine? Clearly, this is an issue upon which American public opinion is going to be pretty strong. Muted.
Sorry about that. Did it again. That's a really good question. While I don't have a crystal ball, I do think there won't be a lack of resources put in by governments, both U.S. and other systems, and there won't be a lack of resources invested by private firms, companies, to ramp this up, to scale up production and distribution of the vaccine. So I'm optimistic with all those resources going in from the public and private sector from different countries that we'd be able to give it to everybody. So I'm not as worried about the next person about that. I'm privy to some of the advanced planning to distribute the vaccine within the U.S. They've been planning for that for about 8 weeks. It's much further along than people realize. The announcement recently from Pfizer of 90% effectiveness of a potential vaccine in stage 3 is really encouraging. And so then the question becomes, how quickly can they ramp it up? That takes resources. I think resources will be aplenty to make this happen. So I'm more optimistic about the distribution of a vaccine than maybe the next person.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Certainly the pandemic has shifted the ground for everybody, and every nation around the world is doing this to some extent. I've got a question I'd like to get the opinion of each of our panelists. We're going to go into this new administration with long-lasting tensions and rivalries: China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and a number of others. What should be the first foreign policy priority of the new administration? Should it be focusing on one of these deeply seated tensions, or should we look for some low-hanging fruit instead?
You haven't mentioned.
Start with Dr. Fullerton.
Well, I'll just say briefly, you haven't mentioned North Korea, and I think that's probably the most unstable situation, and no telling what they might try under a new administration. So I think that might be a first really critical priority.
I think I would probably go for Russia. Their support for right-wing populism throughout Europe, their previous interference in our election and the elections of other countries, I think that represents a significant threat. And I think that's something that we would have a lot of buy-in from our European allies. And I think that would be a good way for us to reestablish some of those ties that might have withered during the 4 years of the Trump administration.
Yeah, it's another really good question. I would say the first priority should be to rebuild relationships with other nations and associations and organizations around the world. We've really let those go by the wayside, and we really need to establish those relationships. And this in part brings China in. So I'm sort of doing the unfair thing and answering that there are two things. I think if we have better relationships with other countries around the world and we invest more heavily in those relationships, that will help us in our battle with China. China has, for a few decades now, been highly aggressive in building relationships, both political and economic, with countries all over the world, including in our hemisphere. And especially the last 4 years, we've sort of been on the sidelines watching that happen. And if we rebuild these associations I'm talking about, we'd be in a better position to go to battle, so to speak, with the Chinese.
So you raised an interesting point about the tension between sort of a one-on-one tie versus a multilateral institutional tie, and that's been one of the techniques of the Trump administration, is to rely on one-on-one ties as opposed to the larger networks. So it's a fundamentally different approach to foreign policy, I think. Dr. Nemeth, how dangerous is this transitional period for U.S. national security? In the media the last couple of days, there's been a lot of discussion about the issue related to security briefings for President-elect Biden and so on and so forth. Is this really a dangerous time for us?
So I think that the refusal, at least in the current moment, to have President-elect Biden have these intelligence briefings is rather dangerous. And I think the other part, and what I was thinking in terms of this question too, is that at least the political science literature suggests that the beginning points of any administration present real times of challenge and real times of risk, because leaders in other countries want to test the resolve of a new president. So I'm a little bit sanguine here because I think people know Biden. He is not an entirely new quantity, so I'm not sure how much our enemies might test him, because they already know how he might react. So I think it's a little bit of both. So I think, one, we're vulnerable because the president-elect is not receiving those briefings. And then I also think that we might be vulnerable in the first 100 days or so of a Biden administration, with the caveat that he's a little bit more well-known than I think other new presidents were.
Thanks so much. Right now, we're sending lots of signals of disunity among the American population towards our foreign policy goals and our practices. Really, I'd like to ask all of you to address this question: how do we rebuild consensus in the U.S. for a unified voice for global engagement? Is it possible? Let's start with Dr. Kreutz, Dean Kreutz.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. I think it would depend on which topics or issues the Biden administration takes up first. An argument could be made to take up some things that are sort of low-hanging fruit, maybe, to build some momentum. That said, boy, there's so many thorny and important, compelling issues that we ought to jump right into. But I think there's an opportunity to win the hearts and minds, and I think Americans like the idea that other countries around the world like our ideas of freedom and democracy, and there can be sort of a normative sell, if you will, to being a leader again in the world. Sort of an antidote to the neoconservative "let's go it alone every time" approach. So I do think it's possible to rebuild consensus, but it'll take, the set of issues would be important that President Biden and others take up, and then I come back, especially with the way the election results came out, with a strong Biden win, but losing seats in the Congress for the Democrats. He can't just do it through the Democratic Party. He's got to have some consensus within the government as well.
Dr. Fullerton.
Wow, this is going to be difficult, and I think messaging is going to go a long way to. We're going to have to bring people back together on a variety of issues, but I think reminding the American public that we need to reestablish our position of leadership in the world, and reminding them what a great country we have, and I think the pandemic it's a great example that we can't go it alone. This is global. We live in a global world. That genie is already out of the bottle. And as much as we might like to think otherwise, we're just part of a globalized world. And so I think people will understand that if we can talk to them, with authority and understanding.
Thank you. Dr. Nemeth.
I'll have to go with Dean Kreutz on this one, but I think the other thing that's important here is that hopefully within the next several weeks, we'll begin to see, and we've already had some inklings from Senator Grassley and Senator Lankford about we need to begin a transition to a Biden administration. So having him become part of intelligence briefings. And so I think that as more and more people hopefully get tired of the impasse, I think that will tend to bring people together, and I also think that time will heal some of these wounds. Of course, there's going to be a group of people that will never buy the results of the election, but I'm hopeful that as we go on, more and more people will become acceptant of that, and hopefully that will help us provide a unified message.
Thanks for that, and I apologize to the audience who sent in hundreds of great questions. We couldn't get to all of them. I've tried to get to as many as we can. And I'm sure that we could go on forever, but we really are coming to the end of our time. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists, what are your final thoughts? What should be the first priority of a Biden administration? Without going into too much detail, what should be the priorities and what are the biggest challenges? And we'll go in the reverse order that we started. So we're going to start with Dr. Nemeth.
Okay, so I think the greatest challenges and the ones that we should start with first are those existential security questions. So I think having the United States rejoin the Paris Agreement, having the United States rejoin the World Health Organization, and just showing a willingness to become part of these organizations and to show a willingness to be a leader, to pick up that mantle again. Because I think one of the things during these past 4 years is that it's kind of evident that the U.S. is still the indispensable nation to a large degree. And the world cries out for American leadership in a lot of different instances. So I think just picking up that mantle and just kind of being faithful in ourselves and showing confidence.
Thank you. Dean Kreutz.
Yeah, I'm going to go a slightly different direction and talk about what you might describe as elite discussion. And so elite discussion, especially elite discussion on the media airwaves and even in social media circles, has increasingly focused on domestic partisan politics and the unique personality of President Trump. And I think what would really help American foreign policy is if elite discussion the next several weeks would pick up some momentum in talking about foreign policy and international affairs. I would love to have more Americans talking about those topics again like we used to, and to turn from being a more domestic, what's going wrong in our party system discussion to what can we do proactively as a citizen of the world. That would be my hope.
Thanks so much. Dr. Fullerton.
Well, I just think we're all exhausted and we're tired of COVID. We're tired of arguing. We're tired of the drama. And I think anything that a new administration can do to just dial things down a little bit, take us back to normalcy, slow the world down, reunite us with each other and with our foreign counterparts and friends overseas. I think we just all need to take a deep breath and hopefully get a little relief from what we've been going through.
Well, thank you for that. It has indeed been a challenging year, and it's not, I don't think anybody could have anticipated where we would be and how it's worked out. I really do want to thank each of our panelists. You guys have been terrific tonight. Thank you for giving up your evening to spend some time talking with us about this. I hope it's been useful to the audience. I do want to remind the audience, if you'd like to hear about more of these events, send an email to sgsp@okstate.edu, and we'll make sure you're on our mailing list so you hear about all of these. In spite of all the difficulties that COVID has brought to our lives, it has also moved us online and allowed us to do events like this and to have a greater reach. So I'm grateful again to O-State TV for hosting us and for all of the tremendous support they've given. Thank you to all who watched tonight and sent in questions. And if you would like to continue to interact with us, please do so. We look forward to it very much. Again, thank you to everybody and good evening.